Hello and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. As you can probably tell if you're a subscriber of this channel already, I'm not in my usual location. Actually, I'm in Sydney, Nova Scotia, Canada, and I'm here at 45 Drive's headquarters for their Creator Summit, and I'm having a ton of fun. In fact, I'm one of several YouTubers that are here at this event, and one of which is Brett. He's known on YouTube as Raid Owl, and he's been someone that I've talked to for quite some time now, but I haven't had a chance to collaborate with him until now. So what I'm going to do in today's video is play back an interview that I had with him where we discussed what's wrong with Linux. But before we get to that though, I need to make you aware that my merchandise shop, the official merch shop for Learn Linux TV, has been recently updated with brand new products. Inside the shop, you'll find distro-themed shirts, bags, drinkware, and more. And there's some other surprises there as well. For example, I've just introduced a mousepad that doubles as a Tmux cheat sheet. How cool is that? You could get yourself something really cool and support Linux learning at the same time, so it's a win-win. Thank you so much for supporting Learn Linux TV. I really appreciate it. Now at this point, what we're going to do is play back the interview that I had with Brett, but I want you to be prepared to subscribe to his channel. You're going to want to if you haven't already done so. Anyway, let's check out the interview. All right, so I'm here with Brett from the YouTube channel Raid Owl. How you doing?
I'm doing good.
And it's Brett, not Brent. I want to be clear on that.
It's Brett, not Brent, not Brad. I've gotten quite a few ones, but yeah, Brett.
Brad seems kind of hard to get out of that. I don't know how. I can't excuse that.
It's. I guess it's my accent. Something with Southern accents make it really hard for people to understand Brett. Like it's usually a 50-50 for people to get my name right, which is impressive, but.
So we're here at 45 Drive's HQ in Nova Scotia, Canada, Sydney. And it's been several days, like I'm losing track of time like I always do, but we've had a number of discussions. We're brought in for a very specific purpose. What I was thinking we could do is kind of talk a little bit more about your presentation and then maybe some of the experience that we had here at 45 Drives.
Okay. Yeah, so my presentation and 45 Drives brought us creators in to discuss de-Microsoftification. That was the theme.
You said it well.
Yeah, they made sure to make sure you say that right.
Yes.
It's basically about how do we get from Windows dominating everything to having a more open source community. I mean, we have one, but I mean, like, how do we get that in the end user's hands? How do we adjust from being so reliant on Windows to open source? So we all did presentations, and mine was on my 30 Days of Linux challenge, in which I failed. I have a video on it. It was an attempt to use Linux only for 30 days. Now, I'm a Mac person. I use a MacBook for Mac OS, obviously, and my main workstation is a Windows machine. And I was like, I will put Linux Mint on a Dell XPS 15, and I will use that for 30 days, and I will document my experience. I am not a Linux expert. You are a Linux expert. I ran into issues. I failed. If you watch the video, it's in the title, everything. I failed at 22 days. For various reasons, and I talked about that, and we had a lively discussion about why that may be. And yeah, it was just a good discussion. If you want me to go into like some of the specifics.
Yeah, I think we will. I just wanted to say that I don't think you failed because you don't fail when you try, and I think failure is not even trying in the first place. Because I see a lot of times where people will barely try. You know, they'll try a live CD for an hour, right? And that's it, and then they're done. But that was a serious attempt, and I feel like you never know what's at the end of that. You could be, oh, this is the best thing ever, I've switched everything, or I got to switch back because it didn't work out. But my understanding from your presentation was very reasonable. You ran into some very valid problems that need to be, kind of looked at, I think.
Yeah, and it's hard, like, from a Linux novice. Now, if you watch my channel, like, yeah, I do home labbing stuff, and I am way more comfortable with using Linux in the enterprise level as a server, obviously, where it dominates the market. But everyone knows the meme. This is the year of the Linux desktop, so
Right.
that's a whole different ballgame. So yeah, I went into it with that in mind, and the biggest pain points I had were from hardware issues, whether that be my Insta360 webcam deciding to go in earthquake mode in the middle of a live stream.
Wow. Sounds like a feature, but I don't think it,
It
sounds
was
useful.
cool, but not what I wanted at the time. But
Right.
yeah, I was on Tom Lawrence's stream, and it just decided to do that, and that was a frustrating thing, and also because the Insta360 software to control that webcam doesn't exist in Linux. It's just you can't get it.
Yeah.
That was one issue that was kind of annoying. Another one was I was having issues with my Thunderbolt dock. I would just sometimes decide that, we're not going to detect monitors. And it's hard to narrow down what is specifically a Linux problem versus what is a Dell problem versus what is a combination of Linux with Dell with Thunderbolt with this specific dock type thing. And I know in your presentation, you talked about testing hardware, and that's probably something I should have looked at before doing this. And I think that's a valid point because I think I was telling you, when I started this, I wanted a laptop, and I almost went with a System 76 one, which is famously known for you run Windows or you run Linux on those. I was like, for the price, I can get a used Dell XPS 15 with better specs, and so I got that, and I read a couple of forum posts that it worked well with Linux, and it was just so many issues. And then the second one came down to software. Like, I am heavily reliant on Photoshop and Lightroom. Lightroom's one of the main ones that I won't budge on, and when I needed access to some of those pictures that were edited in Lightroom, I did not have them. So these are just like a couple of things that just kept eating at me until,
you got to get work done.
Until you have to get stuff done. And it just boiled over.
Yeah, I think so. So one of my opinions, and less so with your presentation, because I think for you, it was like switching your workflow over and everything, which is kind of how it goes. But sometimes when people compare the situation with Linux and Windows, I don't always think it's quite the same comparison. For example, if you bought an HP laptop that runs Windows, then in their R&D lab, they have made sure that each and every component works. And I did Windows administration for a long time. One of the things I liked to do back then was I would just wipe the manufacturer image from the drive because they'd have all this bloatware, like, inkjet ads or whatever it is that are on there. So I just put on the Microsoft image, and when I do this, I have like 5 or 10 drivers to find. But that's not a problem because that's just the industry. Okay, fine, I just install the drivers and it's good. But when you have HP doing that, they put the drivers on and they tested the audio card, they tested the Wi-Fi card for Windows. And one issue is when we come behind them and then we put Linux on it, we become the R&D for Linux at that point because HP decided not to do that. And sure, they did have a Linux laptop recently. That was a really good one. But I think sometimes the experiment can be different if you have a Windows laptop that shipped with Windows and you have a laptop that shipped with Linux. Now, you're not guaranteed to have a perfect experience because if the manufacturer did a poor job, you're still running into the same problem. Yeah. But it's kind of like, I feel like Linux is marketed as the everything OS too much, where people say, it runs on everything, you should install it, and they brag it up. And I love it, but I feel like they're bragging it too much, and they're kind of setting people up for this expectation that may not align to reality.
Yeah, one thing I found out when doing this, and I'd be curious to know how true you think this is that I found when asking for help or trying to get general advice on some of the issues I was having, whether they be like simple things like mounting network shares, like I just want to do that in the GUI like I can do in Windows, and it's almost like overly complicated to do it. And when I asked for that, I was almost like made fun of because I wanted it in the GUI. And it was like the Linux, I don't want to say the Linux community because that's such a stereotype, but certain users in the Linux community almost fetishize making things difficult. Like
They
they
do,
take
yeah.
pride in how difficult something is to do, and if you want to make it easier, it's almost like, oh, well, you're not built for Linux, then, buddy. You better go back to Windows.
Yeah,
Do you
I-
see that?
I do. There's so much toxicity in the Linux community, and I don't want to make it out to be that every community that serves a Linux distribution is bad. I don't want to say that at all, but there are some out there. I won't disparage them and name them, but what I find is that you have helpful communities, you have toxic communities, and for an example, in my forums, an RTFM response is a bannable. That's bannable.
Yeah.
You are not allowed to say that on my forums because my mindset is either answer the person's question or don't.
Right.
Because I get upset when someone gets, RTFM, like you didn't have to respond because number one, you're going to trigger their opposition, which is not going to get them to comply. They are not going to search like you're telling
Yeah.
them to. They are not going to check the manual like you're telling them to. You've pissed them off. That's the only thing that you've done. And we need to, and I understand that it sometimes is so annoying to answer the same questions over and over and over again, but that's what we have to do. And we have to do it with a smile on our face. And anything else is doing a disservice.
You say, like, why are you on a forum then if you're not there
Right.
to answer questions? Like, it's
Yeah. It's like this. And the thing is, if you want to help out in a community, answering questions in the forum is not the only thing that you can do. So if that's something that's rubbing you the wrong way, maybe you feel like it's aggravating you or something, and you might give a response like that, you could maybe take a break from it and go help somewhere else behind closed doors, maybe documentation. If you're a coder, maybe you could do that. So I just don't get why people are snarky like that why are you there?
yeah, and I've seen it before, and I've been on both sides, and I get it that some questions are
Yeah.
frustrating to answer over and over, and some may seem, really simple. But from the other person's perspective, you don't know how much courage it took them to walk into that forum and know that they are going to sound dumb asking a basic question.
Right.
And I know some people are just annoying. Some people come in and refuse to get the help that they need, and it's just. At some point, if you have to walk away and say, sorry, I can't help, like,
Right.
that's fine. Like, some people are just like that, and we get that.
Yeah.
But, yeah, saying read the manual, like, that's frustrating and very
Yes, it
discouraging.
is.
And you only get one opportunity to make a first impression.
True.
So if someone's coming in here and trying Linux for the first time or your distro for the first time, and that's the response they get, you think they're ever going to come back and...
and we are the marketing firm for Linux. I need everyone to understand this. Like, there's no one company. Yes, there's big companies behind distributions, but there's no Microsoft that owns everything and makes all the rules. It's a community project. We celebrate the fact that there's all these different distributions. We celebrate the choice, but then we flame people for using the choice. Like we say, oh, Linux is great because we have a bunch of distributions. But then when they go to post a message, why are you using that distribution? You're stupid. You should be using that distribution. So at one point we're bragging about all the choice with Linux. And when people exercise that choice, then, some people kind of don't seem to like that very much.
Yeah, and one comment I got a lot on my video was, the distro you chose, it doesn't matter what you chose. The distro
Right.
doesn't matter. And I feel like to an extent that's kind of true, but also not true.
It's going to a point where the distribution won't matter at some point in the future. We're not there yet. It's possible that the distribution doesn't matter for a particular person. For example, if their apps all just so happen to be within FlatHub, they're good, right? It doesn't matter what distribution they're on at that point. They can install their favorite applications. But if one of their favorite applications is not there, then they have to go get it a different way. So we have the frameworks, and we have Flatpak, we have Wayland, all these different things that are really going to make things better, but they're not being developed fast enough. And I'm not going to disparage the programmers here because I don't really think it's their fault. What I feel like is you have Systemd, Wayland, Flatpak, Snap, insert name of thing here. People are really passionate about developing this, and they think that they're doing a great thing. I think they're doing a great thing. And then when they release it, people are like, I hate Snaps, I hate Flatpaks, I hate Systemd, I hate Wayland. And think about it like this. You get a developer that's excited, and their spirits, and they're going to get discouraged. So here we are expecting these technologies to grow faster so it can get us there. But what we're doing is we're just slamming the developers for their decisions to a toxic level. Some have received death threats in the past. I mean, it gets to be a point where, if it were me and I was one of those developers, I don't think I would write code as fast because I wouldn't be as excited to do it, knowing that once I'm finished, people are still going to be upset with me. And I feel like that really slows things down a lot.
Yeah, it's that. And it's also, I think we discussed it in one of our meetings. We might have discussed it multiple times, was releasing things before they're ready, because it goes back to you only get one first impression. Like,
right.
I want this feature. Okay, let's develop it, crank it out there. Oh, wait, it doesn't actually work that well. And now that feature is just known as being buggy and crap. And
reputation is everything.
Reputation, especially when you have all these different distros. In Windows, you can get a bad reputation for a certain feature, but it doesn't matter because you're still going to use Windows. Like, that's what happens. If you use Windows and you're used to it, you're used to having these things happen, but it doesn't matter because what else are you going to do? In Linux, if a distro that is promising, that is making advances, but they just, for some reason or another, whether that's self-inflicted or from some other means, gets a negative reputation,
right?
People are just going to hop to a different one. And
that's right. I mean, if we look at a long time ago, I mean, I was a fan of KDE for a long time. I still am, even though it's not my daily driver. I still like it a lot. But there was a point where I was using it full time. And I remember when KDE 4.0 came out, it was extremely buggy. You could barely keep it running. Almost nothing worked well. And then, as a 4.0 release, it's considered stable. And then the KDE is like, well, you're not supposed to use it yet. Wait till, I forgot what version. I'm like, well, you released it as stable. So I don't care if you're not feature complete, but if you're crashing, I have a problem. Mm-hmm. And this is everyone's workflow. Now, obviously, I feel like KDE is great now. I mean, I'm sure they learned their lesson. I haven't heard very many complaints lately, but there's still people out there that might still feel that's the case. There's people that think Ubuntu still has the Amazon icon and that it's spying on them, which wasn't true. But they took that away a long time ago. But people would swear it's still there. It's like once a software project in the Linux community gets a bad reputation, it's extremely hard for them to get rid of that. And you see that with ButterFS when they released 1.0, which was not feature complete. Now ButterFS probably won't have a single chance of taking over ZFS. I think it's a great technology. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's wonderful. But now that we called it 1.0, it's got this reputation of the ZFS file system that barely works, when all they did was call it 1.0. And I feel like once that happened, development of ButterFS slows down. And the only thing I can think of is that it discourages people to hear all that backlash.
So one example I have right now is not specifically a Linux distro, but that conversation reminded me of, I don't know who watching is familiar with Icewhale, the Zima board, Zima Blade, Zima Cube, those Zima products.
Wow, yeah, I'm not, but I want to be at some point.
They're little like SBCs. They're x86. They make a Zima board and a Zima Blade. They're just like these little x86,
like a Raspberry Pi that can boot from a USB key. Basically.
Yeah, it's just a little x86 N100 board, and now they have a Zima Cube, and it's a big NAS. It's like your Synology or QNAP. It's just and they developed their own little operating system for it called Zima OS. And they've been developing it for over a year, but they've never released it as a 1.0. And I'm in the middle of reviewing one right now, and it has a lot of issues, but it's also not a 1.0. So I can't sit here and say, this is bad. Like, I mean, I can say, I can point out all the flaws.
Yeah, definitely point it out.
But I can't say, guys, this isn't a released product. When it's released, then I can give my final judgment on it as a whole. And I feel like if more distros did that, or with their features at least, like, this is ready, this is stable, we marked it as stable. If you want another feature, look at our roadmap. We are working on it. But I feel like that's not the case.
I think we need to have more people from a distro agnostic perspective catalog the hardware and the compatibility, to have a distro agnostic compatibility database. I'm not saying that doesn't exist already. I'm pretty sure that it does, but we need something that is, paid attention to, that's being developed, that is, moving forward, if we just had the one place that people could check, then, maybe you'll type in your NVIDIA card and it might say works with Ubuntu 2404, doesn't work with 2204, and then it has that. But one issue is we have all these distributions developing separately, and that's not really a problem because they should be able to do that. The whole point is to have a distribution of your own. But they're also solving problems independently that they could help other distributions solve. Things that, if you're going through an issue with your dock on your distribution, if your distribution fixes it, maybe they'll let another distribution know what they had to do to get that done. And then the next thing you know, if they upstream it, if it's a Linux kernel issue, then it goes there, everyone benefits. But who's doing this? Like we need someone, like obviously we're expecting users to do it, but they're not doing it.
Yeah. I think it's like a double-edged sword with Linux being so customizable and the fact that there's so many to choose from. That's a good thing. But on the other side, you're splitting your developers and your talent into all these different pieces when imagine if I know this isn't going to happen because it's not the nature of Linux or open source, but imagine if you just took those people and had to standardize one distro. We're going to work together on just this one, and we're going to make Linux good for this one distro. In a perfect world, that'd be great, but that's not going to happen because the reason people get into Linux is because they don't want to be forced into a bucket.
They want that freedom, and that was a big part of the the conversation here at 45 Drives. We talk about things like even during one of the meetings. PowerPoint froze for someone multiple times. We've had an update. Didn't we have an update window come up? I could have sworn we did. We had some kind of message come up a few different times. And it was funny. We were talking about how Windows is disruptive often to the users while it was actually showing disruption toward us while we were talking. Yeah. But that's kind of the main point that we get to when we say de-Microsoft. And personally, my opinion is everyone should use the operating system that works for them. I want a future where someone goes to Best Buy and they see a Windows laptop, they see a MacBook, and they see a Linux laptop. I want them to have a hard choice. I want them to be there for a while and really have a hard decision because all three are just that good. But the reality is sometimes it's just hard to push something forward when all the distributions are each going their own direction. I feel that makes it tougher a lot.
Yeah, and I think we discussed this. That was like I think we were kind of split on this one where feeling about the end user, how much are they actually tied to Windows? And we were like, I don't think the end user really cares too much about the operating system as long as they're guaranteed that it'll work. And Linux hasn't proven that it'll just work because the connotation behind it is that it's weird because it's both it'll work on everything, which I know isn't true, but it has that kind of people say that.
People say that, and then they do it, and
it doesn't work.
Right.
So it's got both this it'll work on everything, but it doesn't work, and it's so confusing that the average person they're never gonna use that over Mac or Windows if that is the perception. So.
And it wasn't a very popular opinion, but I still stand by it, that people don't like change. You know, if someone switches to Linux, or even for just a little while because you recommended it, there's a very good chance that they're doing it because they love you. They're doing it because they're supporting you. They're helping you. They're being a team player. But changing an operating system is just not a mindset anyone has. When they go to an appliance store, they buy a fridge. They don't care what's inside the fridge. They just want their soda to be cold. That's all they care about, right? Mm-hmm. So imagine if we go up to somebody and say, hey, I want to change the operating system on your fridge. It's going to cool your food better. What? And I know that's a stupid example, but if you think about it, when you have a person, they buy a computer, it's an appliance. They think of it like they're buying a stove, a refrigerator, a dishwasher. They're buying a thing that does a thing. And that's all it is to them. We come in, change the operating system. Many of these people didn't even know that was something that you could do in the first place. And they're going to feel anxiety when you recommend this because what you're telling them is, I would love for an opportunity to change the way you do everything. Wouldn't that be so cool?
Yeah.
And then they don't want to get on board with it. But my opinion on Linux is that Linux on the desktop will only take off when a flagship desktop, not marketed as a Linux desktop, but does have Linux installed, takes off, then that would be something that could happen. But it's just
So like, I mean, look
Yeah.
at Chrome OS, like
right.
Linux based. It doesn't say
Android?
Yeah, yeah. It's not Linux Android. It's
Right.
not Linux Chrome OS, but it is popular. People like it.
Yeah.
I wonder how many people you think actually know that when they're using their Chromebook or their Android that it's based on Linux. What percentage of people? I mean, I legitimately don't know.
I mean, I really don't know, but I can't imagine that many people
Right.
know or even care to know.
Yeah,
about
so
that.
imagine, like you said, if there's this third operating system that comes out that looks as good as Mac OS and it has the compatibility of things with Windows, people would be like, okay. I mean, not overnight.
Well, I disagree. I mean, I see your point, but I feel like people will never switch to Windows, or I mean to Linux, because people are that averse to change. It's really hard for us to understand this because we get excited when new technology comes out because there's new features, there's new technologies and things to learn, but they don't get excited about those things. And I just feel like we're pitching something to a market. See, Apple ships everything as, I hate to use them as an example, but they're very good at selling things. They're extremely good at this and marketing. How many times have you seen them market, oh, check out our new version of BSD?
So many times.
Right. It's every commercial, oh, BSD OS,
Yeah.
right? No, it's Mac OS. They're selling a Mac computer with Mac OS, and it does well because they're selling a product. Meanwhile, I feel like we're trying to sell an idea to people. We should be selling a product.
Yeah, and I think it's going to boil down to, and this is getting further
Yeah.
into the discussion, but like you're used to, like you said, you don't want to change, so you're going to use what you're used to. So
Right.
how do we get the younger generation more used to using Linux if that's what we want to succeed moving forward, if that's how we want Linux to gain more users? But I feel like what's popular these days is, this, what you have in your pocket. This is what
Yeah.
people use as their main
100%.
device. So,
Yep.
which I don't know if that hurts or helps, because I feel like when I was growing up, we didn't have this. If you
Right.
wanted technology, you got on the computer.
Or went to the library because you couldn't afford a computer.
Yeah, and now it's like there's this distinct separation between my computer and my phone. I may do more stuff on my phone, but when I want to do something, I get on the computer.
Right.
And now it's like, well, this is my phone and that's my computer. If that's a Linux one, then sure, but I do most of my stuff here. So
I think
it's
one
gonna
user...
change. It's going to be a weird next generation, 10, 20 years. That's for sure.
I can envision someday the desktop completely dying and laptops being the only thing. Now, when I say this, I want to be clear. I do not see gaming PCs dying, okay? When I'm talking about desktops dying, I mean for the people that don't game, like the people that, are working in an office or, their computer's an appliance, they don't care. People will still be building computers and buying video cards, but I do feel like at a certain point, other than that, the desktop is going to die, and then as the portable devices which run Linux easier, there's an opportunity there for Linux to come up with another device. The desktop has already been won for so long, it's really hard to go back retroactively and win it this time. But if, we saw with netbooks, Linux was there at the beginning. And at that point, a lot of people don't realize this, a lot of people had a Linux laptop. What happened? Tablets. Tablets came out. Everyone thought netbooks were going to be the thing. It looked like Linux was actually taking off. And next thing you know, we have Android tablets that we switched to that. We switched to the iPad, and netbooks fade into obscurity. But what we saw was a new device form factor coming up, Linux being there first and gaining from that popularity. I think that's what we need this time.
Yeah,
too.
good example that we're seeing right now is the Steam Deck. Valve gave the customers a feature and a reason to buy a product, and the operating system was secondary. You're
Right.
buying this to game. You don't care how it does it, but it's running Linux.
Right.
So, everyone's seen that spike in the amount of users using Linux just through Steam Deck sales because of how
Right.
popular it's gotten. And I think if you can do that in a more I don't want to say corporate world, but more just like generic end user world. Like this thing, it's super easy to watch YouTube and browse your mail, and that's something I guess you see with Chrome OS. I guess that's the appeal to it, and they don't care what it is. Like you give someone something, they don't care that's Chrome OS, they don't care that's Mac OS. It works. So until a Linux distribution can get there,
Right.
that is that easy for the average user on various different hardware and is compatible
Right.
with different hardware. And I mean, I don't know.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and I feel like it's so valuable for me to hear about these things because I've been using Linux for 22 years, right? So I want to hear what people are going through today. I know what people were going through when I first learned about it. I know what people are going through as I read the news and study the communities and look at what people are saying, but that's never the same as hearing it straight from someone's mouth. What was their personal experience? It's their personal workflow. They decided to give this a shot, and then they have something to say about it, and that feedback is valuable.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't want to because a lot of the times, if you tried Linux and you failed, you don't want to admit because you seem dumb. Like it's almost like, oh, I failed this thing. I must have done something wrong. I don't want to go share that with a bunch of people, and some people do. Obviously, there's people out there that are saying, oh, I had this issue. Why did I fail? But a lot of people don't. Like they just, like you said, put in a live CD. Mess around with it. It didn't work for me or something broke. Unplug it, never try again, never tell anybody. Like it just sucks. If someone asks you, oh, did you ever try Linux? Yeah, I tried it once. It was terrible. Like that's.
But we also have to keep in mind too that sometimes the whole thing changes and is reversed when someone starts with a different operating system. Like I know somebody that started with Linux. Like, when she's young, she wants a computer, whatever. I have spare parts, put it together, put Linux on it, gave it to her. Seemed to like it a lot. There was no problems because that's what she started with. She never really had any issues. She was not a computer person either. Like she just learned how to do it, and that was that. But she got frustrated one day when her friend asked her to help her put MP3s in an MP3 player. It wasn't an iPod. It wasn't Zune. It wasn't anything crazy. It's just one of those that's a flash drive, and it works on every operating system. So it did work on Linux and Windows. So her friend has Windows, and I'm trying to walk her through it. I'm like, okay, here's what you do. You click on the start button. You go to My Computer, and when you're inside there, you should see like some kind of icon that represents your music player. And that's exactly what it was. But she gets irate, and she's like, why did I have to click 3 times to go to my MP3 player? This design is stupid. And then she starts like making fun of My Computer. Like, who thought? I was like, I don't know, but that's just the way it is. And that's just, and I don't really have an opinion here. But the reason I remembered this so well is because what I saw was somebody who didn't start with Windows or Mac, and I got a chance to see what their world is like when that's the only thing they have experience with. And you get to see what their issues are with Windows. And I'm not going to say that's a very standard thing, but I do feel too that the operating system you start with colors your mindset of computing to a point where it's really hard to change that later.
Yeah, that's hard because how often do you get the opportunity to talk to somebody whose first operating system was Linux? Not very often.
But mine wasn't, so.
Yeah, not like many people's was. But
Right.
I will say, I guess if I had to offer two pieces, the two most important things, I think, are the barriers for a lot of people getting into Linux, and this is both from personal experience and from talking to people in my community, is one is hardware compatibility.
Yes.
And I don't know how you solve that, if there's some centralized database that has all these different combinations, or if there's some type of hardware compatibility check that you can
There
check.
are, yeah, there are already. It's just that there's at least a few of these, but last I checked, they didn't have the information I was looking for. I feel like, we need something new that's with some excitement around it. Some people that really want to help this out. They are willing to have someone send in hardware for them to play with and then report back. You get enough volunteers all over the world that are willing to do this and not just say it works. And that's it. No, we don't want that. We want like some details. If it's a GPU, did you try multiple screens? What refresh rate did you get? What monitor, what resolution did you get? And was that the native resolution of your display? I mean, these are the kind of things that we really do need to know. And we need something that's going to provide that to users. That's third party, has no distribution interest, and is just there for that. And that's just one way. But I feel like we will solve this. I also feel like part of the reason why it's so challenging right now is Linux is in a state of transition in many different ways simultaneously. The init system, the display manager, universal apps are being introduced along with containerization and immutable distributions. This is all being introduced right now. Okay, it's going to be there's going to be some dirt in the room and some dust, I think, for a little while.
Yeah, and the second thing I think is just package management. Like when I go into a distro, I shouldn't have to worry about if it's using Snap or Flatpak, or if I need to go find the deb on their website, or if I have to load in the specific repository and use app to get it. Like there's so many different, I don't know if you standardize it or if you make a proper UI for a package manager that isn't terrible. Like it's just so frustrating because in Windows it's pretty standard and Mac is pretty standard. You download the app, you run it, it's installed. Here it's like even when you do have stores and you search for something, and even in repos, it's like, wait, which version? Why do I have? I want to install Plex Media Server to run on my Debian desktop just to try it out. Whatever. I type in Plex. There's like 4 different versions. I'm like,
that's a legit problem, absolutely, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's absolutely true.
I think those are the 2 big ones that if you can solve those, that is the 2 biggest hurdles I think a lot of new people to Linux face, including myself, because those are the main things you interact with, your hardware and your software. And if either one of those you have issues with it, you're going to give up. And that's what happened to me. So,
have you by chance tried app images along the way, or has that crossed your radar?
I have. I think that when I was running Ubuntu, is it used in?
It's used. It's another. So there's 3 primary universal package formats that are vying for dominance. We have Flatpak, Snap, and app images. App images being a distant third. But the reason I bring them up is because, my opinion is mixed about them. But what I do like about them is, it's like the the Mac app mentality on Linux. You download, like on Linux or Mac, you download a .app, right? You double click on it, you can run it. You can put it in any folder you want. Doesn't matter. Double click on it, you run it. So an app image, it's a .app image file. You double click on it, it runs. It has everything it needs. You put it in any folder you want, and you just run it from that folder. And then you could do, for example, you could have your syncing solution, like SyncThing, sync your apps folder with all your Flatpak or app images, update one, and then your Google Drive or whatever it is will get all the others updated. But I like that solution because it does give you the ability to just download something and run it. You don't worry about it. The problem is not everything's available that way, and then there's no then you got to go in and update them all. And then you run into the Mac situation that Mac users run into, where you have to download something like Mac Updater, because you have on Mac you have the App Store. There's updates in there. System settings. You have your Mac OS updates in there. Individual apps will update themselves, or maybe they won't. But you're supposed to go in and find out if they didn't or not.
Some do, some don't.
So in Mac you have a lot of issues, but they're not nearly as bad as the Linux issues. But even with Mac, it's really cool that you have a .app file. You run it, you're fine. And with app images, which I'll have a video out shortly, we'll explain how to use them. But I bring that up because people are trying to come up with solutions, but we're going to have to decide in the community, which way are we going?
Yeah, and that's the hard part. And I think everyone loves repos. It's so great in Linux. Oh, you want a software app? Install this. Boom, you're done.
It's funny. I hate repos. It's an unpopular opinion because when I first started Linux, I'll never forget this. It was like the very first version of Ubuntu ever, and I was using OpenOffice on that. And then, I'm liking it, so I go online and I find the news that a new version of OpenOffice has just come out, and I'm like, well, that's really cool because I want to check that out. I really like that. So I ask in the communities, how do I get that? How can I install that? It's available now. Just wait for the next version of Ubuntu. I'm like, wait a minute. You're telling me I have to wait for the next version of my entire operating system to have the courtesy of upgrading OpenOffice when Mac and Windows users are able to go to the website and download it. And LibreOffice nowadays, and even back then they might have had another repository, but that's not even the point. The point is, you're being provided a package in the repositories that may or may not have a third-party repository that's up to date. But the issue you run into, like Linux users, I don't think we can tell Mac or Windows users that they have to wait for the next version of their operating system for the next version of their software, the straight face. And that's why I've always hated that. My mentality has been your Linux kernel, display drivers, critical operating system components can be apt packages. They could be RPMs and distribution repos all day long. But once you get to the user layer, we need user space apps out of the package management completely. We should not have Apache in the same repository as our Linux kernel. We should be able to install Apache separately via a universal package that is independent of the package system. And this is why we run into problems where someone pip installs something and then it blows away their package database. And then they want to continue to say that repositories are great. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people in my audience are going to disagree with me on this. Software repositories are not good in the way that they're being run today, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's insight that, as a novice, I have no idea. Like that's not something that crosses my mind. I'm the end user that when I am so used to apt install this, and then it is confusing because, as the new person comes in, you're like, wait, everyone's telling me to use apt install to get this, but there's a packet, there's a store.
Right.
Shouldn't I use that to install it?
Right.
It's like, no.
Exactly. No.
It's like, but wait, yes. But what do I do? It's very confusing.
So usually what I tell people going forward for now, at least to try to make sense of this craziness, is when you go into your app store, or whatever you want to call it, and you want to download something, sometimes, or at least a lot of times, there's a drop down. It'll say Deb version, Flatpak version, RPM version, Flatpak version, whatever the case may be. What I'll tell people now until we figure this out is just download the distribution package for now, unless you need the newer version. Now, one tip I give everyone about Linux is you should never, ever, ever, ever consider using the distribution version of LibreOffice. That should be the first thing you install. You should never open it. You should never consider opening it. You need to delete it. And then after you do that, you could get LibreOffice as a Flatpak that is fully up to date. Now, why am I asking you to remove this? Now, here's the problem. LibreOffice gets stigma. People will say it's not as good as Microsoft Office. And the reason why they say this, I think, at least in part, is they have a very old version in their distributions repository that they have installed. And since then, LibreOffice has been, as they do, they look for ways to reverse engineer what Microsoft is doing. They fix things as they're broken. They keep updating it. And you need to be using a newer version of LibreOffice to benefit from the continual fixes that they put into this. But now, because distributions are shipping this, they're shipping old versions. I mean, what version do we have in Debian stable right now? Probably 2 major versions old. I'm just guessing. But my point is, they open this up, they get a Microsoft Word file from a coworker, for example, they get formatting issues and it doesn't look right and tables are broken and everything looks a mess. I get the same file in a LibreOffice version that's newer and it's fine. But, sometimes I think distributions have to realize that they themselves are, making things harder for people.
Yeah, it's totally true.
So
I don't know if we solved any issues today, but
hope we did. Hope
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like throughout this whole week is like, you're not going to solve all these issues in a day, but it definitely takes, you got to start somewhere and you got to have the conversations, because if you don't, it's just going to keep going how it is. And we've seen how it's going. And obviously with Linux's 6% desktop share, if we want that to increase, you're going to have conversations. People are going to have to make tough decisions that some people don't like, but somebody's got to start making some decisions.
Well, we are the marketing for Linux.
Yep.
We are the marketing, the Linux community, Linux users. And especially YouTubers like ourselves, we are the marketing. You will not, at least not now, see a Linux-related commercial on TV. I haven't seen one personally. Maybe in some other countries where SUSE is more popular, for example. Maybe that happens. I don't know. But we are the marketing, which is why I put so much work into special effects on this channel, because I want to position Linux in the best light possible, because we all need to do that. Because if we just need to do the best we can, and sometimes that could mean someone sees a problem and they want to step up and come up with a solution. I encourage anybody in the audience share some ideas. If you think you know a solution to this, or even if it's in the form of new software you want to develop, or something that you want to not develop because you're not a developer, but draw out on paper for all I care. If you have an idea, I think we need to get those ideas to the people that can make that happen. If that person isn't you, and actually put feet on the ground on these problems and get this solved. And I hope people in my community, anybody that's complaining about something, a valid complaint, something's not working, do you have the time to do something about it? Do you have the expertise to do something about it? If you don't, do you know somebody that does? Do you know somewhere where this conversation can get started? And that's what we need to do. And I feel like we can get there, but the Linux community will be who decides that.
Yeah, 100%. And maybe we're back next year and things are different.
I hope so. It'd be fun. It'd be fun to do a sequel to this.
Yeah,
and
1
to
year
say,
later.
is it better yet?
Yeah, that would be entertaining. But yeah, this was awesome. It's
Yeah.
good to sit down. A lot of people, their first impression of Linux is bad and they get discouraged because they go to the
Right.
forums and get that feedback. But it's good to, sit down and have a conversation about what your issues are without, and talk about actual solutions instead of just a bunch of angry comments and people screaming things that just don't help anybody. So yeah, like Jay said in the comments, like if you know anybody, if you have the expertise to make things better, I'm all here for it. I know I had a Linux video where I failed, but I legitimately am still using Linux. I have the laptop. I brought it with me here. That's what I've been using. I'm still using Linux.
He's still trying it. He's doing a presentation about it. Meanwhile, he's actively still right now. I saw him just trying some stuff on Linux Mint with your GPU issue. So
we'll be back next
We'll
year
be
to
back.
see where we're at. But yeah, this was awesome.
Thanks.
And there's our video. I hope you enjoyed today's video and this interview that I had with Brett. It was a ton of fun, and I look forward to collaborating with him again. In the meantime, subscribe to his channel if you haven't already done so. It's under Raid Owl, and also mine as well. And you know what? I really hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you thought of this interview in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video.